So, welcome back, everyone. We will now listen to a presentation by Magnus Larsson from Max4, and he will tell us about the large-scale facilities in the Halos region, but also about the ecosystem around them. And we will then continue with the panel discussion with several interesting topics, so please stay along for that. And there will be short concluding remarks in the end. But before we start, we have yet another poll question that we would like you to answer. So next slide, please, or the poll. Okay, thank you. So we see here that many of you have actually used DESI, and that's very nice, and it has been around for a while. ESS is not up and started, but there is of course personnel that is available if you want to collaborate on things. We also have some that have, or one that have collaborated with European XFEL. That's very nice. We hope to see more doing that in the near future. And then of course we have also a bunch that have worked with Max4. Excellent. But then also we have some that have not used neither these facilities nor other similar facilities. And those 25% we want to see become users in the near future. And Magnus will tell you about many different ways how you can access the facilities. So please, Magnus, the virtual stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Kajsa. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Excellent. And thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk here today. I will just say that to start with, that I put a lot of contacts and contact information and links in my presentation, and it will be available afterwards for download, as some of you might have seen in the chat. So you don't need to take so many notes, but you can go back to this later on. So I would like to talk to you about these large-scale research infrastructures that we have in the region, what we now call the Halos region. And I want to put particular focus on industry and industrial use, since that is my focus area, trying to help industry make use of these type of facilities. And I'll also talk about what kind of support that is available around these facilities in the ecosystem. But I really want to stress that we have these unique research capabilities in this region. In Hamburg, we have the Petra 3, the DESI site, a well-established synchrotron that's been around for a long time, providing outstanding materials research capabilities, and now on its way to embarking into an upgrade to Petra 4. Putting it in really global top. And we have in the neighbor, we have the European XFEL, an X-ray free electron laser, and one of only a handful in the world, with the European one at the very top, providing this really high energy bright pulses of X-rays for material science. In south of Sweden, we have Max4 laboratory, the first fourth generation synchrotron light source, paving the way for a new way of building and designing this type of facilities. now in full operation, but also with capability to continue upgrade in the future. And another European project, the European Spallation Source, ESS, hosted by Sweden and Denmark, with the experimental facility in Sweden and the data center in Copenhagen, that will be able to provide neutrons very top class in 2027, when it will be up and running. So this is a really unique region in its truest sense when it comes to large-scale research infrastructure capabilities. And I think we should also mention that there is a synchrotron facility at Aarhus University with the Astrid II synchrotron available also in this region. So fantastic capabilities, but the really key here is that these are all user facilities. This is not CERN that we're talking about. These are facilities that can be used for science and research in both academia and industry. And most importantly, in this context, they are very well suited for different types of life science challenges and experiments, as you have heard about today. But what I would like to talk about is how you can make use of these and how you can access these facilities in different ways. And we've seen a couple of examples, some of them connected towards industry. And I just want to underline that these facilities are really open for industrial use in science and research. And it's open today. So these facilities, they offer this extra capability when it comes to a wide range of length scales and time scales, as you heard Felix mentioned earlier today. So you can use it in your research, in product optimization, to use the in operando capabilities to study manufacturing process, or also for input data for your modeling, or perhaps for patent applications and even marketing sometimes. Drug discovery is already well established at the facilities. So the pharmaceutical companies working in this field already routinely use these capabilities, and are also pushing the limits together with the scientists on how to develop this into more advanced features, completely automated system, remote data collection, fragment screening capabilities that's now been opened up at Max4, for example, is established together with companies like AstraZeneca, Soromics, and Sprint Bioscience. But also working towards the serial crystallography to look at even more complicated protein structures. When it comes to the rest of life science, there's a lot that can be done, and you've already seen some examples, but formulation is one field, but also many different types of tomographic imaging, so you can see these cell structures. And there are many examples, and we have put together some of these cases, and you can read more on the links here. For example, bone support using tomographic imaging to look at different substitutes for bones, working in collaboration with a researcher from Lund University. It's Alligator Bioscience, together with the media to companies, Soromics Biostructures, investigating the use of serial crystallography for drug development. And in medtech, there are many examples. Here is an example where Swedish orphan Bergvittel, together with the RISE, is using neutrons to look at leaking syringes and see how to tackle that. So there are many examples. And how can you use this? Well, there are different ways to get access to the tools. Either you come directly to the facility and use the tools, or you have some sort of collaboration and get access indirectly. If you would like to come directly, there are two ways in: the general access, proprietary access. In general access, you apply for beam time, and you um, come often in collaboration with academic research partners, but you can also come as a company and apply for beam time. Your proposal is ranked on scientific merit in competition with other researchers around the world, and you need to publish your results, but you will get the access for free. You can also, as a company, pay for access to be in full control of your results and keep full confidentiality, but then you have to pay for the access. So now I'm taking the example from Max4. It's similar for other facilities, but there are different ways in. We have some companies coming where they have the capabilities in-house. You can buy access or you can apply for beam time on your own. Most companies are not in that category, and they prefer some sort of support, and there are a couple of support ways. There are some mediator organizations, some companies out there, and institutes and projects that help companies to get access. So we sell access to these companies, and they provide solutions for their customers. You can get some support, of course, from us and do collaborations with us. But the really main route is to come together with an academic research group. And through collaboration with an academic research group, you get access and benefit from these tools in various ways. There's also a possibility to make investment and develop things together with the facility and get access in that way as well. And this is a slide I got from colleagues at Petra 3, and it's similar at other facilities. You have the same opportunities. You can have direct commercial access, doing collaboration with DESI, and this can be different types of collaboration. For example, you can develop a method together with the beamline scientist and to increase the capabilities for you, but also for others. You have these collaborations with universities or institutes and these commercial service providers. So what kind of help is out there? As I mentioned, academia is really the main help provider. As we see, if we talk about the bulk, we get some statistics from our users, how many of our proposals have some sort of industrial collaboration, and it's between 20 and 30%. So almost a third of our users have some sort of industry collaboration. And you have heard some good examples today. And through the Halos project, you can reach out and find even more collaboration partners. But we are trying to collect things in a project called Max's Industry Arena. So the starting point is Max4 and ESS, but now expanded across the borders, also including other facilities. But here is the place where industry can be able to find the research partner. So we have this catalog of research groups, some centers, beamlines that you can filter out based on different categories or have a free text search to easily get in contact with research groups or research centers that can somehow give support to industry in this field. And here we also encourage, if you're not affiliated and connected to Max4 Industry Arena, you can have your name in here, and if you're available for industrial collaborations. Here we also try to put down a lot of easy to read cases, also with links to collaboration partners. You can see what other companies have been doing at these facilities, and it's not just for the facilities in our region, but anywhere in the world. So please check out maxs.se and see if there's anything there for you. We also have different types of support projects that is ongoing. One such thing is the InfraLife project. This is a collaboration between Max4 ESS and SciLife Lab, Science for Life Laboratories. It's a Swedish distributed large-scale research infrastructure for life science. And here we're trying to reach out to industry and healthcare to open up the facilities for them. And contacts here to Josephine and Elin working in the project. There are, of course, many more collaborations and possible collaboration partners. EMBL in Hamburg is part of the HALOS project and also deeply involved in this and has beamlines at Petra 3, really working towards structural biology research. CSSB in Hamburg, a big center collaboration between 10 different parties working towards infection biology research. Just to mention a little bit more about these support organizations. So there are these, we call them mediator companies or commercial analytical research organization, CAROS. And there's a network that started out. You can find more information here, the CAROS. Even though the project has ended, the network is still there. Other projects such as Next Bioform, formulation of biologics. It's a center with different partners, and it's led by RISE, the Research Institute. And of course, we have our own HALOS project, and MBA is someone you can always contact. But to get the most out of it, reach out. There's also possibilities to be part of this in a deeper way and even establish your company in one of these, closer to one of these facilities. For example, Science Village, Scandinavia, the area between Max4 and ESS. This is the vision at night. This is what it looks like today. So there's still room for you to establish here in this space in between, but it's continuously growing, this area. And in Hamburg, the area around Desi is growing a lot, and a lot of these centers are showing up. And please contact Sabine if you want to learn more about what is going on in this region. And since we're running a bit low on time, I think I should wrap up here. And thank you for the different support that we have got through all these projects. And I will stop sharing as well.
Thank you, Magnus. Very nice presentation of the HALOS region and the unique resources that we have. They really form a great complementarity to each other. So we can see if there come some questions in the Q&A function. We have time for it before we go to the panel discussion. I was thinking, Magnus, is there different ways if you should recommend a company that want to be involved in this ecosystem? Does it matter if you are a small or medium company or a large company? Are there different routes that you would recommend them to use?
No, it doesn't really matter. Of course, it matters how much resources you can put into it and what level of support you're needed. But it all comes from what background you have. So we are open for anyone who is everything from just being curious to what is this and can this be something for me, to companies that are already well established and have their own internal resources, but also the companies in between who know that there might be solutions to their challenges out there, but they don't really have the in-house capabilities. So if you didn't catch all the names, take this presentation and make contact with the industry offices at the facilities or through this project, and we can help you and guide you to the right connections.
And what about the cost? Is the price to pay for beam time a factor that regulates the number of users at all today?
I don't think so. The cost of beam time, just for if you just put the number out there, it's at 4 is 6,800 Swedish krona per hour access time. It depends on what type of experiment you're looking for. If you need 4 hours of beam time for protein structure determination, it's not a huge cost. If you need to set up a project that requires a week of beam time, it starts to become a significant cost, and then it's perhaps better to take a more of an academic collaborative route and establish a work process, and then once something is set up, you can go the proprietary route. But the cost is, of course, you have to think of it as an entire project. It's not just the beam time at the facility that costs something, it's the surrounding work. And we also saw and heard some good presentations, what kind of support we're trying to build up when it comes to data analysis, because you end up with a lot of data and you need to be able to process that to get information and then know-how and knowledge out of that. So you need to think of it as a little bit of a larger project. But it depends from time to time. Sometimes you just need a specific measurement of a sample, and then it's a smaller thing. Sometimes it's really an investigation, and then it's a big project.
Thank you. Yeah, I acknowledge what you're saying, that there are steps both before and after that also need to be handled. And I noted that Zoe Fisher from ESS posted a link in the chat, and there are resources and there is a call open from ESS. So if you haven't looked in the chat, please do that, because it takes time to prepare for the actual beam time, and we should all take advantage of what is available both at the pre-step and also at the post data collection level. It's required to have the entire workflow in place to gain as much as possible of these fantastic resources. Okay. So I think maybe we should move on and let Fredrik Melander start to moderate the next session. So maybe we should have a slide so I can just also introduce who you will now see for the next session part. So again, thank you, Magnus. Thank you for a great presentation, and welcome to moderator Fredrik Melander, Head of R&D Relations at Science Village Scandinavia. He will in his panel have Karina Lobley from ESS. She's Senior Officer in Scientific Coordination and User Office. She also has a lot of experience from the UK side, Diamond, so she might share something about that during the panel discussion. I hope so. We are pleased to also have David Brown, who is the Head of Structural Biology at Servier and also affiliated to University of Kent. Then we have Arven Persson, who is my partner in crime in Halos, but she's also working with a lot of other stuff, including research at the Hamburg Center for Ultrafast Imaging at Hamburg University. And we are happy to have Marjolaine Tunnisan, who is the Life Science Director of MAX4 Laboratory. So welcome everyone for the panel discussion.
It's time for me to take over now, Kajsa, perhaps?
Yes, please,
Yes,
Fredrik.
and everything works out fine. Thank you very much. My name is Fredrik Melander. I'm the head of R&D relations at Science Village Scandinavia. And Magnus showed you the very nice pictures of the area between ASS and MAX4 that my company, or our company, owns and are challenged with to develop into a thriving academic industrial nexus for the next decades. And we're very pleased to see actually some activity starting on the ground now, and we will most likely, as the plans to go ahead now, see the 2/3 groundbreak this spring, actually, for the 2 first new buildings that is coming up. That was called among them the Loop, that is a sort of conference and office building. So things are really starting to move, not only on the facilities, but also for us in-betweeners, so to speak. I think it's this panel discussion. My idea with it is actually try to pick up and deepen some of the discussions that maybe that Magnus gave in his presentations, and also perhaps given in the earlier scientific talks. Maybe also so we can link it together for a big discussion. And I encourage very much also that the audience post questions for the panel in the chat, and we try to pick them up as we go along. Kajsa, you gave a short presentation about our panelists, but I think that we should give them a few more minutes to say a few words about themselves, to introduce themselves, and a little bit about their current role and background. And I suggest we start with Carina. A few words about yourself and what you do.
Hello. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to speak today. It's going to be a really interesting conversation, I hope. I'm at ESS running the Scientific Coordination and User Office, and perhaps behind me, if I dodge out the way, you can see that the main buildings of ESS are actually built now. So the process here now is of filling up with instruments and getting things running. And on sites like mine, getting things in place ready for users and ready for the science program to really take off. Kajsa mentioned that I have a past. I do. I used to be an industrial MX crystallographer, and from there I moved to Diamond, to the MX beamlines, and then into the user office. So hopefully some of that will come out today if we need it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carina. And I move along to our dear friend David. A few words about yourself and what you do and have done.
Hi there. Thank you for inviting me to be on the panel today. Yeah, so my background is I'm a crystallographer by training. I spent many years at Pfizer as a crystallographer. I'm also currently chair of CCP4, so I'm still very heavily engaged in crystallography, and I head up the structural biology group at Servier, which is structural biology, biophysics, and molecular modeling and chemoinformatics. So trying to look at these, we saw some talks earlier about integrative structural biology, heavily involved in how we take things beyond just the current or the historical, looking at just domains of interactions with single domains and how they interact with our small molecule drugs. I've been heavily involved with Diamond since its inception. So Diamond have set up something called the Diamond Industrial Committee, which was really about defining both what industry wanted from the synchrotron, but also there to expand usage of large-scale facilities in Diamond, but into the industrial sector, and have seen how difficult it is for, if it's not part of your daily job. So as MX crystallography is it fully embedded within structure-based drug design within the pharmaceutical industry. If it's an additional non-standard type of experiment you want to do, how difficult it is both from the industrial side to understand what use cases there might be, but also finding the right partner to execute those use cases. So I've seen how difficult it is to grow usage of a facility. So I think that's the reason I'm on the panel today.
Excellent. Yeah, please, David, you were about to finish up.
No, I was going to say I'll say no more for now.
Okay, I think you're already digging into the matter here. Arven, over to you.
Hi, everybody. So as Kajsa says, I'm the German coordinator for HALOS, based at the University of Hamburg. And I'm one of those non-standard experimental people from the mention Dave just gave. So in our research group, we focus on developing time-resolved tools for structural biology. And at the moment, these are really niche techniques. And our focus is on making these things much more broadly accessible. So improving the ability for a non-expert user to come in and make use of these. And as well as my university hat, I also co-operate an end station on Petra 3 in collaboration with the European Molecular Biology Laboratory that's dedicated to these kinds of measurements. So thanks, Fredrik.
Thank you. And finally, Marjolein.
Thank you, Fredrik. So my name is Marjolein Tunnissen. I'm currently the Life Science Director for Max4. So part of my job is that I have a couple of beamlines that are in my division, which cater for life sciences, some classical beamlines, like the beamlines for protein crystallography, but then also the more unusual ones, like Balder, where you can do X-ray absorption spectroscopy, as Kajsa showed earlier, and then, of course, imaging beamlines and scattering beamlines. In addition to the beamlines, I'm also responsible for the user offices, and that's the academic user office and it's the industrial user office. And in that role, there is, of course, also a very big interest in how we can make our contacts better, whether it's academia or industry. Actually, many of the challenges, especially for those user groups who are not used to synchrotron methods, are very, very similar, whether it's industry or academia. It's just as difficult to really go into the medical sciences and clinicians and actually tell them about the beautiful experiments that you can do as it is for industry. An advantage, though, is that academia is more of a homogeneous field, while industry can be very different in size and approach. So, and finally, my background, like all the others today, is I'm a protein crystallographer from training.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we have a little bit more understanding of who our sharp minds in the panels are today. And I think the first kind of question that I would pose to everybody, good, now we maybe can see everyone on screen at the same time, is actually, we heard very exciting scientific presentation from various techniques being used in different types of collaborations. And Magnus also gave a very thorough, I think, very well structured presentation of the industrial access route and into it. Is there any key message that you think today, or some highlight that you would like to pick up on from the presentation? Something that this is an important thing to understand if you are a life science company in the audience wanting to get into this. Is there any particular sort of key message that is important from what you've heard so far today? And so that is one open question. I'll come back to it. And Marjolein, while you're thinking, there was actually a little bit of, I think it was from the poll maybe, that many of the companies that were in the audience, right in the poll, it was that has said that have used the facility before, but it was quite low on Max4. Was that sort of maybe that was just a coincidence here? But maybe you could, when I give the word to you later on, reflect, how is the life science use, if you can say it like that, on Max4 today? Well, not in exact numbers, but is it the largest part of the facility, or what sort of the activity in the life science area at Max4 at the moment? But I would like to start a little bit actually, but if there is anything that we'd like to pick up, a key message that we heard from the different talks. And maybe if I start with you, Carina, then Marjolein have the time to think a little bit about the question that I specific. Carina, is there any key message that you would like to follow up on?
I think it was something Magnus also picked up on. Felix gave an excellent overview of the time scales and length scales that are available,
Yeah.
and how appropriate those scales are if you're using neutrons and X-rays to look at biological and biomaterials. And I think that's really important. I wouldn't say any one technique, but I think that particular method really stood out to me.
We also had a little bit of, there came up a question also in the chat, the discussion about ESS is not open for use yet.
No, not yet, we do have neutrons.
Exactly, and I think that also it was Zoe, your colleague, that mentioned in the chat that there is an ongoing work on the deuteration lab that you actually already now can support users from different. Can you elaborate with that?
I can, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Our deuteration lab is taking calls for proposals to deuterate samples, and those can then be used at other neutron sources. And the advantage of deuterating is you can start to look at the difference between where protons are and where protons are not. So this is something that we can do, and we have a call for proposals open. The other thing, of course, is we have a science directorate full of instrument scientists who are building instruments, but they're also instrument scientists. And they can, you know, on a case-by-case view, look at whether we can collaborate on things to help build up a community.
That's good. So, but you're a few years down the line to be operational. So, but we're all looking forward to that, of course.
Yes, we're all very excited about it, but it's going to be a few years yet. I think we've got a not before 2025.
Okay. David, anything from a presentation, Magnus, or some of the science that you see, this is a key point, key message that I also noted from the presentation. Anything that you would like to reflect upon?
Well, just I think as Karina's already highlighted, the vast array of technologies that you can apply through synchrotron or large scale facilities to approach life science problems. I think one recognition that integrated biology is now here, and I think cryo-EM's probably done a huge bit from a structural side of starting to span from, as I said before, from small molecule small domains of proteins to bigger proteins, protein complexes. And you saw the lovely talk in the terms of the tomography, looking at organs and tissues. So, you know, that link of being able to use these multiple methods to better understand what's going on inside a cell from my perspective. I think that's really, really important that's coming online. But there was one other thing about somebody mentioned about the upstream and downstream parts of the experiment. The data collection is just one component of this. And I think, you know, the whole sample preparation before you get to a beamline or to a facility is really, really important. And also the post analysis and the data interpretation. And I think one of the key things, particularly from an industrial perspective, is actually leaving with interpreted data rather than just data. You want to leave with a result. You don't want to leave with just data that you're not perhaps the world-leading expert to analyze afterwards. And I think as just pointed out by Karina, there's a whole scientific community there that is world-leading experts in their own field that should enable ordinary industrial scientists like myself to better interpret the data we're collecting. And I think so to leave with a result as opposed to data is a really, really important thing.
That's very good. I'll pick up on that a little bit later when we talk about the ecosystem. For this is very interesting to see if there are a support system that actually can work along the whole value chain or a whole process. I think that's a very important question to understand that process. Magnus was into it a little bit, but I think it's important to pick up on. Arven, from your side, listening from Hamburg to the presentations, anything that you picked up on?
Yeah, so I think both Karina and Dave made excellent points. So one thing I'd like to add is that what you find at these large infrastructures are bright people who are inherent problem solvers. And so if you go and look at the portfolio of kind of experiments that are possible, that doesn't mean you have to limit yourself to that. If there's something you want to know and something you would like to measure, it's always worth getting in touch and talking to us, because quite often we might be able to build you something or to design a new kind of experiment that will answer that question. And I think you saw in the talks we had in the first half of the meeting, the sheer range of different kind of things people were looking at. And every single one of those experiments started with somebody saying, I would like to know X about Y. And then that interaction with the facility scientist to make that experiment possible. And so that it's not just here's a list of things you can do and pick from one of these. It really is, you can come and work towards a bespoke type experiment for your need.
Okay, thank you very much. Marlene, over to you. I think you and Magnus I took you at the last in the discussion here because you and Magnus are colleagues, so you maybe so I think that was more fair. But a few words about sort of life science use so far at the Max4 facility. Was it a sort of a random thing that few of users in the audience today have used Max4, or what do you think?
I would actually say so, because by far our biggest users of the facility right now are life scientists. Biomax, the protein crystallography beamline, is by far the most used beamline for industrial use. And protein crystallography is maybe a little bit of an outlier in a way, because the industry is really, really aware. The method really demands synchrotrons. There is lots of expertise within the industry itself. And by all of these standards, it's more an outlier than actually the norm. The norm is actually much more experiments that where people have a problem. And as Armin points out, maybe not even aware that we can help, because it's just beyond what they can kind of think of. And therefore, it's so important that we do outreach, that we try to tell, okay, we have seen these kind of problems, so that people get inspired. And that, on the other hand, people also talk to us, because it is indeed quite often so that there is more things possible than you think. But paradoxically, yes, life science is the biggest user of.
I expected that.
The other thing that I also should point out, we are still quite a young facility. And that means that we have brought up more and more beamlines online, but some of these have not been online very long. And in general, for industrial use, we want the beamlines really, really to be stable and steady. So a certain level of maturity is required from a beamline to really do full industrial support.
Thank you, Maj-Len. And another question that I think that is interesting is that when we did the first poll, I think it was quite clear that the audience, the companies, particularly maybe that is participating, can be grouped into three groupings. One group that has very low knowledge and very early sort of limited knowledge about the facilities. There was a big medium group, and there was a sort of also a high level group. I don't know if that was the academic audience that actually was in that group, but I think that really reflects the way it looks in the sort of both industrial side, but also perhaps in the academic world. So, but if we try to be really, really practical in the panel, what would your best advice be to a low, medium, or high? Sort of maybe not the high, because they know how to do this, but if you go to those who do that with very low knowledge and those with a medium knowledge, Magnus presented a whole variety of access modes and things like that. So if you're going to be really practical to the friends listening here in the audience, what would the recommendation be? What is the first step? They come out of this seminar, this might be something for us. What would be the first step for a low and medium user to do that could show interest? Maybe that's a nasty question, but I think interesting to also be a little bit practical, and not only showing the sort of flows. Would you like to start, Maj-Len, this time?
Thank you. So if I would have an interest, if I would have a problem, and I think maybe something can be done, my advice would actually be contact Magnus. Just write an email, or send even a line to us in general. We will pick it up. We most likely will start a conversation to really understand what is actually the best approach, and we would go from there. But the first thing to happen is, of course, make a contact. And of course, before you do that, you can browse, for example, Max ESS. There are other websites available where you can see descriptions of other people's problems and what kind of results could be obtained. So you can actually browse around a bit as well. But the step thereafter is, I think, make contact.
David, you work with industrial users for a number of years in a variety of settings. What would your sort of practical recommendation be to start? Would it be to go to a mediator, or would it be to be activating some kind of platform, or would it go directly to the facilities? So what's your reflection on that sort of very practical question?
So I think that one, the answer is, as always, it depends. It depends on who you are and what your knowledge base is yourself. I think, as Arwin said, as long as you've got an introduction to somebody you can talk to discuss what the experimental outcome you're looking for is, or what the problem you have, and what experimental outcome it could be possible using one of these facilities, I think you're always going to be in a better place than just ignoring the fact that the facility exists and your problem will still exist. So I think having that this initial discussion, I was rather interested in I wasn't aware of the Max ESS sort of like dating app there seemed to be, but it seemed to be a one-way. That you couldn't actually say this is the problem I've got, and there'll be a panel of, in confidence, there'll be a panel of people that could assess what your issue was. It was like more a case of these are the people are there, and they'll talk to you, but not the other way around. And I think as a business, if you had that sort of, this is my problem, please can you help me solve it? And I think what I didn't say in my introduction was I used to run a contract research organization, rather like Syromix is you have in as a user. And I think one of the main things we did there was people would come to us with this is the scientific problem I've got, can you help solve it? And have to build up a trust in terms of, yes, we can do this, but we can't do this, but if we can't do this, somebody else can do this for you. So you're acting as a CRO, you're acting as a consultant there for less experienced users. So a lot of that was for, obviously at the time, protein crystallography, but it did include other techniques and finding other solutions where people came and said, I need a protein crystallography solution, and they didn't. They could actually answer the question in a much more simple way. So I think it's finding those right partnerships and finding that forum for you to, as a business, to feel comfortable to approach and say, this is what I've got. Is it an easy problem or is it a difficult problem? I just don't know how difficult it is to answer that question. Using the expertise and the expert panel around you. And I think it's been said several times, the level of expertise you have in these and the level of experience about tackling these scientific problems that you have in this community is absolutely a fantastic resource. The hardware itself and the infrastructure is fantastic, but the people there, you shouldn't underestimate the quality of what that brings to the organization. And I think there was a comment, I just want to say, there was a comment made before about, the ESS not being online till 2025. Now is the time to engage. Now is the time so that ESS knows what the problems they can help solve for you, and starting to adapt their solutions to be able to meet the business requirements in 2025. So early engagement is the best thing you can do.
I think that was very good. Passing over to Karina, actually, how are you reaching out to these industrial users today, Karina? Maybe I know that you've also been working on industrial use around Diamond previously. Do you have anything to add on to this? How to reach out, any practical tips or recommendations that for the companies? But how do you work today?
At the moment, we're welcome to talk with you about what we can do, what we might be able to do. Yeah. We can, for example, look at making your deuterated sample with you, and then helping you get through an experiment or helping you move in the direction of an experiment. As Dave says, it does take some time to prepare an experiment, or it can take some time to prepare an experiment. So it's never too early to approach, really. No. And then if we know you're there, then we can always come back to you. So that's kind of where we're going with that. I wanted to say something just to those really high experienced people, which was always listen to your support scientists. Because as other people have said, the people on the beamlines do know a lot. And I just thought, even if you're a really high experience, Marjolaine and Dave have approached the low experience very well. And I just wanted to say, always listen, because there's more you can learn.
Can I just a follow-up question there? How do you feel about the interest from industry to ASS? Is there given that you're not really an operational facility at the moment, and that also, even though you have services and support that you can offer for deterioration and other things, what is the level of interest in Neutron? Because if I should generalize a bit, synchrotron is rather in several industries, that's a standard technique that is well known to in the pharmaceutical industry, biotech and others. Neutrons are a little bit the new kid on the block, so to speak, with the new capabilities. How do you feel? How do you see the interest around ASS, neutrons, and industry at the moment?
I would say similarly to the data that Magnus showed, in neutron science in general, in a survey across neutron sources, most industrial users come collaborating with an academic user. As that grows, those commercial people get the experience to start to come to their own instrument time and not need their academic collaborators. So that may be one thing that's going to happen. We have an access mode for industrial users, or we will have an access mode for industrial users, and we will have an access mode for quick access. So we are in our founding our user model, we are looking to make sure there's a good, important space for industry. And I believe we have an industry advisory board as well. So we are working to make sure that we can cater for industry as soon as the instruments, as Marjolaine says, as soon as the instruments are stable enough to provide a good service.
Arven, I think you're the last. You mentioned this kind of, you were into this in your first intervention here, but anything you would like to add sort of on this practical level?
I'd like to pick up on two things. So one, as Dave says, so about 50% of the inquiries that come to us about experiments are not an experiment we could solve with time-resolved crystallography. And so I actually spend a lot of my time talking to potential users and then pointing them to other people. And that's really a resource that we can offer you in Halos. As Dave says, if you're looking for people you can approach confidentially for a first exploratory inquiry, just who should I talk to? Halos is there to help you with that kind of approach. So if you want to get in touch with us, you can do. And I wanted to pick up on just something Karina said with neutrons and industry. So historically, the neutron sources we've had available have been relatively weak compared to X-ray facilities. And that means a lot of the experiments have been real experiments rather than necessarily measurements or characterizations that you might want to do in an industrial context. So that might be sort of more one-off type approaches. And something to bear in mind as ESS is developing is that ESS is a much brighter source, and that means throughput goes up. It's the same for the X-ray facilities. The X-ray facilities are upgrading, which is also increasing throughput. And that's moving some experiments that may have been, as say, sort of exploratory pilot projects into the realm of where you can really start to think about doing statistics or a regular measurement type approach. And crystallography obviously is already there. But if you remember back to Anja's talk where she was presenting some of those imaging experiments, at the moment, those are still high-end experiments. They're long time to do, they're difficult to do. But with the upgrade in brightness for both the neutrons and the X-rays, we're moving into the regime where you could think about doing multiple measurements of that kind in a day or even in an hour. And that I think is a game changer that's coming down the line in the next sort of 5-10 years at the facilities, that something that needs to be on industry's radar.
Very interesting. I think this is also taking the discussion into another area that is what I would like to call maybe a buzzword of the day. So the ecosystem around the research infrastructure. Several of you have already picked up on several of the routes to interact with the facility is together with, if you're an industry partner, that would be together with an institute, the CRO company, that could be with a sort of kind of a platform, thematic platforms in different sectors. And I think that also, David, in your first intervention, you really highlighted this, that you need services and functionality along the whole value chain, from problem identification to preparations to doing the experiments to also your post-experiment analysis, etc., etc. So this whole value chain perspective. So So my question is sort of, do this kind of value chain support system, do it exist today? Do you have it in Hamburg? You think, Arvin, that you can support users the whole way, or actually not maybe you, but you can point at the directions that there is a simple way of having support through the whole value chain, so to speak?
Dave, do you want to go first?
You can go first, since you no, David maybe go first, but that kind of that full perspective, do we have that kind of, do we, or maybe also do we what do we need to develop to be able to offer such a sort of a value chain support mechanism, or whatever we could call it? David, you started this in the first introduction. Any other reflections on this?
So I think I mean, again, you've got to remember, particularly for industry, particularly for larger industry, large pharma, there's a choice. They will choose where to go, where they get the best return on their investment, where they get the best level of support, where they get the best beamlines to execute their problem. So I think you have to first of all consider what the global ecosystem is here, and then think locally, what can you do to tune what you provide to give you more chance to provide the solution for your local and actually a wider community, because it has to be world leading for big pharma to choose where you want to go. For smaller biotech, that may be, you know, more customized solutions, more hand holding, more working in partnership with them in some of the other models you've described. And, you know, the fact you're going to have this sort of incubator or science park nearby is really, really important. But, you know, to attract people to that park, you've got these great facilities, but unless you've got local infrastructure for the science park itself and some privileged access to those facilities in some way, you know, why choose your incubator over somebody else's incubator? You know, again, that's a high area. There is regional funding that might make one place more preferential than another place, but and funny enough, I was just involved in Servier launching an incubator at the Saclay, which has got a Soleil synchrotron in proximity. How do you attract people to that? What is the right way to attract people? It really depends on what the offer is and what the value proposition is for them being there, and what that gives them in terms of local expertise, local infrastructure, and similar type activities by other potential collaborators that might fit around what their organization provides. So it is really, really important to think about the community, the access, all these components, because if it's your company and you're a small SME, you really care about that. And it really is, as an SME, you can't afford the high level expertise to access all these things yourself. You're going to need to rely on partnerships. You're going to need to rely on collaborations to provide those technologies. I don't know if that answered the question. I think it's interesting, but I can jump over to Maya perhaps, because the ecosystem around, and maybe also Carina, the ecosystem around ASS and Max 4 is, I mean, as the facilities, they are young and we are growing bits by bits, and when Magnus picked up on the Maxess web platform as one way in, David, you also mentioned that it will be elaborated, developed into a more a dialogue form, a more interaction, but now we're sort of making this as a resource, simple way to gather all the resources available for industry. But the goal is, of course, to develop more interaction activity linked to it. So it was a good point. But Mylin, as you see a lot of projects and activities also growing around the facilities in Lund, is there any particular piece of this value chain, to speak, do you see that we lack, that it's extremely important that we develop? We see an enormous increase in capacity and brilliance in the facilities. Is it the analytical part that is actually maybe the weakest part at the moment, or what's your take on this value chain perspective?
I think this is a very important question, and I think one of the biggest issues that we see, and that is definitely also coming from industry, is actually the amount of data. The amount of data coming out, the capacity required to handle it, and even in the talk today, by Anders Boy, it really shows that you also need very, very clever people to do the analysis and make tools that actually non-experts can use. And once again, crystallography is maybe way ahead here because they have had tools that actually make the analysis possible for non-experts in a way that no other technique has. But I think the biggest problem that we have is really this problem of the data deluge that is really coming at us. In general, gateway environments, I think there needs to be more funding, and also the interface of gateway environments between academia and industry probably needs to be highlighted. We have very many good examples, but quite often there is something more needed and some more effort. It really can go to the other level. We see, for example, at Milliken Village, which is one of these tech environments that a common pool of instrumentations and techniques can really help people forward. So even coupling to expertise about synchrotrons could help such constellations. But data is my biggest worry right now.
Yeah, I think they're interesting. And if I pass this question also over to you, Karina, maybe 1 kilometer or 1.5 kilometers north from Meyerland. Well, I know there's a big investment in the data analytical capacities already from the start at ASS. Do you share the same concerns, maybe, or the more challenge that Meyerland? Since you'll be able to produce a completely new level of data that's coming out of the instruments. So whole this analytical part of the ecosystem, is it available at ASM? Will it be available at ASS, or do we also need an ecosystem to pick up on that?
Well, we're quite lucky in that we've established our data management and software center in Copenhagen. So we're that's the other main ESS site compared to Lund and Copenhagen. And but they have instrument data scientists, and they're starting to look at how they will manage data and how they will catalog data, and how data will be made available to users and to the general public in the end, under fair data rules. So we have established something. As Mylene pointed out, I think it was Mylene, no, it was Arwen earlier. Our data is going to come fast for a neutron source, but slow for a synchrotron. So we have less need to worry than synchrotrons do. Also, we won't come online with all 15 instruments in one go. So we'll be building up the amount of data that comes off. So we'll be able to watch the example of our synchrotron colleagues and our neutron colleagues, and hopefully we'll be able to follow their example and pick up on their techniques for using data.
Good, thank you. Arwen, if we move down to Hamburg, looking at this sort of value chain perspective, what kind of sort of both, are there sort of these kind of, we came into the analytical part of it, are there these kind of support structures in the Hamburg ecosystem that also can help companies, not only with maybe preparing the instrument, but also with sort of this analytical work that is, I guess, extremely important because companies want to solve problems. So it's not the data that is interesting, it's actually what comes out of the data and how to use it that is really interesting.
Yeah, exactly. So at Hamburg, in much the same way as all the other facilities, there's, and this depends a little bit on the exact experiment. So for crystallography, I would say it's mature. For the other techniques, it's something that's an ongoing area of development. But in terms of the automatic processing and then the delivery of that information back to the user, because it's not super helpful sometimes for us just to give you processed data. What you really want is that data presented in a graphical way that lets you see at a quick glance the quality, and you really want that happening on the fly. You're paying for your beam time, often if you're an industrial person, and you would like to know during that measurement if things are going wrong rather than 24 hours later when you're back home. The other thing I would like to highlight is also right at the other end of that experiment is your sample delivery and the automation around the experiment. So one reason why crystallography has been so successful at synchrotrons is that as a community worldwide, we've settled on standardized sample mounting technology. And that makes a huge difference in the ease of doing these experiments. You can take the same sample amount and go to pretty much any synchrotron around the world and be able to do an experiment with low overhead. And that's coupled with automation on the beamline. And something I think we've all learned during the last 2 years of the pandemic is the importance of the ability to be able to remotely work and to remotely control the beamlines. And again, crystallography has been a few years ahead of the curve here. So the bulk of our experiments are now done remotely. But the pandemic, I think, has really sort of kick-started this effort to automate and enable remote access on a lot of the other instruments. And that is driving then in turn a standardization of sample environment and this on the other types of experiment as well. So I think we're going to see again a shift in what the facilities can offer users in terms of standardized environments, standardized protocols, simply because of this shift towards more remote working.
Very interesting. When we prepared this session, Kajsa told me, I think it was Kajsa said that, Fredrik, don't forget also that you need to see how the HALOS region as such can improve and develop. It was an important thing to mention. I think I reflect a little bit about that challenge. And I think one aspect to this, actually, our two of friends here, David and Karin, have some vast experience from different roles and functionalities in and around the Diamond light source in the UK. And if I say like this, Diamond seems to be a very successful case when it comes to industrial use. I don't know if it's a lifestyle in particular, but there is a sort of a vast amount of industrial collaborations and use in Diamond. Is there any functionality or role or a way of working that you say, this is extremely important that the facilities in the HALOS region develop further? Is there any sort of best practice or example that this is the way that was making a difference? That was a little bit of a putting things to the edge, but David, would you start on that one?
Yeah, I think we've already mentioned sort of the outreach activities of having an industrial liaison group that actually was there to frame what type of work and what opportunities there would be for businesses to engage. And that also fed into the design of beamlines and beamline usage at the synchrotron from its inception. So I think that first thing is really important. Again, the Diamond benefited, or when we went to our first industrial meeting, the PX guys, we'd already had. So two things: the crystallography community is a close community anyway, as Arvin's already alluded to. We already knew what we want. We already knew what standards, So when they said industrially, what do you want? We were saying exactly what the collection times would be, how much, what the access rate mode would have to be to really get that engagement. And as I say, we're very fortunate. It was an integrated part of drug discovery, driven by the speed and the return on the investment you can get from doing X number of experiments for X amount of money in X amount of time. And that's really important to remember. Has to be the value proposition in there. And that's why it's standardized and heavily used by the pharmaceutical industry in particular. So I think that's one key component. The other thing is in terms of the infrastructures around the synchrotron for those areas that don't necessarily have a particular use case or an industrialized process yet. We had the research complex at Harwell, which was right next to Diamond, and things like the laser facility in that. So again, coming back to some of the other talks we heard about the other types of experiments and integrated approaches to problem solving, having expertise that may not even be beamline driven, but scientific related program, things like storm imaging can be done outside or in an adjacent environment. You've got the right academic people associated around a synchrotron facility, and now that's been further followed up with the Rosalind Franklin Institute, that they're driving new methodologies, creating the next use cases for industrial access at these beamlines. And I think that ecosystem, the local ecosystem, is really, really important. And it is important both for the people who come to use the facility, and that's driven again by what we've said already about having some of the world leading scientists working in proximity to that synchrotron themselves and keeping the right cutting edge science going on at or near the facility. And I think that's one of the key focuses that has to happen at the Science Village as well.
I think that for me, that's I need to applaud you, because that's the key message that I want to take home to my work, and I completely agree with it. I remember one of the first I think some mentioned Professor Paul Nissen earlier today from Aarhus in one of the talks. I remember one of the first times when I worked at the Danish Research Ministry before, and I met Paul, and I say, what's the new thing about neutrons and structural biology? It's not that, but now we can add another instrument to the portfolio. It's not the neutrons as such, but it's that now the portfolio of techniques and methods are broadening. And we can work together with all of those techniques. That is the new thing.
Well, I think you already heard it this morning from the talk about the SACs. So with SACs,
Exactly.
You've got SANS is now available on, and they're not necessarily going to answer all the questions that I want to answer of a sample, but they may enhance my knowledge of what's going on in the solution state to go alongside my static structural vision or my dynamic simulation or my HDX experiment on looking at conformational change of the sample. And all these things come together, and we're bringing this integrative approach to looking at a molecular level of interactions and a cellular level of interactions, and that's where it all comes together now with fantastic new scientific computational algorithms to help us identify things and work through.
I think that was the key message that I think we could continue talking about these things for long, but I think that was a message to me to say that we have to wrap this up. I think it's been a really, really interesting talk here. I think the time we're about to stop now, actually. So David, Karina, Arven, and Mylin, thank you very much for this, managing a panel discussion on this forum and format. It's we have learned it over a couple of years, but I like sitting around the table, or actually an ordinary panel, and I hope to see you at a panel somewhere close to us very, very soon. So thank you very much, everybody. And I think I hand over back to you, Kajsa, don't I?
Thank you, Fredrik, and thank you all in the panel. It was very interesting and enjoyable to sit and listen to your discussions. Fantastic ending of the day, I would say. So I will be very short now, just a few concluding remarks. And I think it was fantastic to listen to the HALOS researchers. And one thing I take with me was that several of them referred to having done Max Forest Fund projects. So the predecessor to HALOS. They had done projects in Max Forest Fund, and they had started to become users of the large-scale facilities. That they were here today means that they have continued, and several of them also showed examples of how they had gotten several larger grants as a result of starting a cross-border collaboration around a technique at the large-scale facilities. So I think that was very, very nice to see that it is a successful model forward. I also think that in this afternoon, it was very encouraging to hear about the different access routes and all the ongoing work for businesses to be able to engage and use the large-scale facilities. It was also clear from many of the talks and the panel discussion as well that the research infrastructures around the large-scale facilities are of high importance, and that we really need to develop an integrated approach to this local ecosystem and understand the complementarity and the needs of the gateway environments as well as the large-scale facilities. So yeah, this was a lot of repetition perhaps, but I think it was many good points, and I want us to take them with us, together with the fact that it was also mentioned several times that personal contacts are very important. And I hope by this meeting today that you all have gotten a set of different alternatives of contacts, and that you now will take advantage of them for the future. So from the HALOS side, thank you everyone, all the speakers, panelists, Fredrik as moderator, and everyone from Medicon Valley Alliance, of course. It's been great fun. Thank you all for attending.